Welcome to the second day of the St. Louis Regional Freightway's virtual FreightWeekSTL 2021. I'm Mary Lamy, the Executive Vice President of Multimodal Enterprises for the St. Louis Regional Freightway, a business enterprise of bi-state development. FreightWeekSTL is in partnership with the Inland Marine Expo hosted in downtown St. Louis. Yesterday's panel discussion focused on global connectivity, the importance of multimodal transportation, and bi-state collaboration that helped secure a grant for infrastructure improvements at 3 ports in 2 states. Today's discussion will focus on transportation of agricultural products, infrastructure investment, multiple states working together, and an economic outlook nationally and globally. First, we'd like to start with thanking our sponsors, starting with our presenting sponsors, Global Gateway Logistics, Burns McDonnell, the Lockmuller Group, Crawford Murphy and Tilley, or CMT, and Castle. Our supporting sponsors include the Hauser Group and the Jerry Costello Group. Our associate sponsors include SIBA, SICAP, Washington University, the Boeing Group, CDI Engineering, and Jefferson County Port Authority. Our panelists today include Adam Sparger, Director of Transportation Services Division with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Ken Erickson, Senior Vice President, Head of Client Advisory and Development, Energy and Transportation, and Policy with IHS Markit. And Tom Blair, St. Louis District Engineer with the Missouri Department of Transportation and a member of the Freight Development Committee. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. We'll start with asking each of you to introduce yourself and your organization. Adam, we're going to start with you. Adam is an economist working with agricultural shippers and government policymakers on multimodal issues and is also the author of the USDA report that was the catalyst for today's panel discussion. Adam, can you start with providing a quick introduction of USDA as it relates to the freight industry and your position?
Yes, thanks, Mary, and many thanks for inviting me to speak today. It's a great honor to be here. I'd also like to recognize there's many authors on that report at DOT and at USDA, so I was just one of those, so thanks to them as well. But my office, the Transportation Services Division, provides economic analysis on agricultural transportation from farm to market for our stakeholders and our senior policy officials at USDA. And it may not be immediately obvious why USDA cares so much about transportation, but agriculture is currently the largest user of the freight transportation system in the U.S., representing roughly 27% of all freight ton miles with an annual value of $3.1 trillion moving on that system. And in addition, we expect agricultural freight to increase 23% over the next 20 years, which makes freight planning critical for all levels of government. But the needs of agricultural freight are unique and not always accounted for in highway planning decisions, and thus we wanted to shed light on the importance of highways to agriculture. We wanted to demonstrate that maintaining the performance of the highway system is essential to keeping freight costs low and supporting the continued economic competitiveness of U.S. agriculture.
Thanks, Adam. We also have Ken Erickson with IHS Markit. Ken is an expert witness in the area of transportation, logistics, and supply chain matters, and has worked for USDA's National Agricultural Statistics and Marketing Services. Ken, please introduce us to your role with the firm as it relates to domestic and international freight transportation and the ag industry.
Well, thanks, Mary. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And certainly I enjoy working here with IHS Markit. We've been with this group now 2 years. It was 2 years ago at this event that it was announced that we were being acquired by IHS Markit. And we've really found a great landing spot to participate with a number of people who are very involved with clients, very much forward-looking, whether it's in transportation and energy, economics, financial, looking at automotives. All of that's very important as we work with our clients globally and look at what it means to move products to market. And for us, we talk to our commodity clients who are really actively purchasing, buying, or selling grains and livestock, proteins, softs, and et cetera. They're really not trading corn or soybeans. They're really trading freight. So transportation is very important as we work with our clients and looking at the forward view of what's that forecast for the size of the barge fleet. And we finished up our barge fleet profile survey, for example, and looking at how many barges are available to move commodities. We transform that into a forecast of what's that mean on freight rates? What's the volume that's going to be moved in those barges? What's the utilization? We conduct similar reviews and analysis and forecasts for the rail side, ocean, whether it's on container, on bulk, whether it's dry or liquid, and look very much back to the infrastructure and what that means to what kind of infrastructure is required to handle commodities, but as well as to support the movement into and out of a facility where, and for those assets that are rolling and floating, what is it that they've got to roll and float over. So we work very closely with our clients globally and work across all of IHS Market, and certainly appreciate being here today with this panel, Mary.
Thanks, Ken. Next is Tom Blair with the Missouri Department of Transportation, representing the St. Louis District. Tom's leadership has resulted in several national awards and recognition for projects that include the award-winning I-64 project, the I-70 Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge, and Modot's Road to Tomorrow team. Tom, please introduce us with your role with Modot.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I'm thrilled to be part of the panel today. So thanks for the invitation. I am Tom Blair. I am a civil engineer. I have engineering degrees from Iowa State University as well as Missouri Science and Technology. I've worked in various roles for Modot throughout various locations throughout the state of Missouri for the past approximately 30 years already. Time flies. Currently, I am in the role of a district engineer for Modot. I am responsible for Modot's team of nearly 700 people focused on providing safe and efficient transportation throughout the St. Louis region. Modot's St. Louis district comprises of 4 counties, including the St. Louis City. So we are in St. Louis. We're home to over 2 million people. About a third of Missouri's population lives in the St. Louis region. While statewide, Modot is responsible for the 7th largest state-owned transportation system at nearly 31,000 miles and over 10,000 state-owned bridges. The Modot St. Louis team that I get to lead is responsible for about 6,000 miles of roads. And also, I think it should be noted that bridges are really a big deal in the St. Louis region. We have the 2 nation's largest rivers, the Missouri and Mississippi, and they converge here. So we have about 10% of the state's bridges in the St. Louis region, about 28% of the state's Missouri's largest major river bridges right here in the St. Louis. So not everything in St. Louis is about transportation, though. We are the home of the Arch. We are the home of the St. Louis Cardinals, the St. Louis Blues, and Forest Park. So there's a lot of great reasons. So for all of you out there, if you haven't been to St. Louis lately, come to St. Louis and visit us.
Excellent, Tom. Thanks. Okay, we're going to start with Adam. Adam, the catalyst for today's panel discussion is the report that you helped author entitled The Importance of Highways to U.S. Agriculture, and it was released late December of 2020. Can you give us an overview of what that report revealed?
Sure. Yeah. We wanted a study that could complement the piece that we actually did with Ken's group back in 2019 that took a look at the importance of the inland waterways to U.S. agriculture. And the highway system was a logical next step because almost every agricultural freight trip includes at least one truck component, whether it be the first mile or the last mile, or as an intermediary to connect to rail or barge facilities, or as a truck-only movement between any 2 points in the country. And we wanted to offer awareness of how critical the highway system is to U.S. agriculture and illuminate current challenges, opportunities, and highlight some of the best practices that we're seeing currently. We also wanted to create a practical and actionable reference guide to serve as a framework for state-level DOTs, regional planning entities, and private sector shippers to tackle the highway planning needs for agriculture in order to help inform future research, planning, and policy analysis. So in order to do this, we created a model of the highway freight network and made sure we captured as much geographic and commodity diversity as possible to create this network. And based on our model sample, we found that 80% of domestic agricultural highways of highway freight volume moves on 17% of the highway network. And these are some of the most important corridors in the country for the movement of agricultural goods. And we further focused our study on 17 different regional highway corridors within this network and used some novel analysis techniques to illuminate how the condition and performance of these networks, such as pavement, bridge conditions, congestion, reliability, and safety, impact the performance of movements of ag products. But as we all know, the highway freight network is a complex system and involves many actors at the national, state, regional, and county levels, as well as many different types of stakeholders. And this report demonstrates the interconnected nature of agricultural freight and highlights the need for cooperation across state and jurisdictional boundaries, whereby planning entities at all levels have to work together to optimize the system, identify and address those needed improvements.
Alrighty, thanks, Adam. So Ken, we found it really interesting and very helpful, the portion of the report where they went and identified the high volume domestic agricultural highway corridors. Can you tell us the value of being in one of those corridors?
Yeah, Mary, those corridors are very important, and they're very illustrative of the types of flows that would be emerging out there. And a few key things about those corridors. One, that there's a ready supply of commodities along that corridor or at one end of the corridor or throughout that corridor. So supply is very important. And as we know in production agriculture, especially whether it's in grains and soybeans, and even for row crops and fruits and vegetables, and perhaps vegetables more than fruit, is that there's no guarantee that it's going to get into the ground, and there's no guarantee that it's going to come out of the ground and germinate, and then to grow into a very productive fruit or a productive seed head. And then there's no guarantee that it's going to be fully harvested in a timely or an efficient manner to be able to then get to the market where it's got to go. These corridors, though, allow for that movement of those commodities, and the identification of these corridors get to be very important for a number of reasons. One, again, that to recognize there's a supply and that there's something that needs to be moved. And then secondly, there's a demand or a consumption base in along that corridor, at the end of that corridor. There's a number of ways to look at those. But the more important part is these recognition of these corridors. And certainly, there's many other corridors that could emerge out of these or that could serve in, because really you got quite a bit feeding into them, is that there's now recognition for what is required for that infrastructure to support the rolling assets that need to move product to a market position. And whether it's going to a domestic a consumer, either indirectly via a food manufacturer or someone who's going to add value to that product, or it's going to go to for grain to an elevator and then move on to another position, and ultimately to either a crush or a grind position, or it goes to the export position for movement overseas. As the United States is a very beneficial country to support the world in a lot of commodities, and very important to our trade balance, quite frankly. But you look at that corridor, what gets to be very important is along those infrastructures, and that these have been identified. And as Adam said, we did some work with them in 2019, looking at the waterways in particular. But just think about some framework around this as we think about inadequate infrastructure, or there's an impediment in the infrastructure. When you have that kind of a response where there's not enough infrastructure, or there's a breakdown in the system, that just reduces the available transportation capacity that's rolling over it, let's say in this instance. And when you have less transportation capacity to move the same volume that needs to be moved, you're just going to get higher freight rates, because the capacity utilization changes and things are just slower to move to market, or you don't have enough capacity to load that because you've got an impediment, whether it's for a light loading onto a truck, or you have to take a diversionary route to get to someplace. Those freight rates show up back to the farmer, and those farmers then have lower farmer income. And what we see is that the basis starts to collapse, because farmers at the end of the day really are paying that freight to move commodities to market position. And then what that ultimately happens for that farmer, and really for the United States and for these corridors, you become less competitive, and really that gets to be less globally competitive in these markets here. And now you start losing market opportunities and be able to expand and operate. And really that global competitiveness then hits those local economies, where those farmers are generating this commodity that's adding value to the system and really sustaining and providing food for people in the United States and around the world. And now all of a sudden, you don't have as much investment in these local communities. So this gets to be very important, Mary, and the identification of these corridors are very important as we think from a transportation infrastructure response. What does it mean to remain competitive? What does it mean to have assured a confidence of a system that will supply for the consumers to eat and for their food to be on the table each and every day?
Ken, that's an excellent response. So Tom, Ken just did a great job of describing the value of these highway corridors. And we know one of those corridors is Interstate 70 that crosses through the state of Missouri and through the St. Louis region. What can you tell us about that ag highway corridor that runs through the St. Louis region?
Yeah, well, I first want to thank Adam and all the authors of the importance of highways to U.S. agricultural reports. This report really calls attention to these high volume domestic agricultural highways, right? These highways are essential to U.S. farmers, the agricultural industry, downstream producers, and they represent the highways with large volumes of domestic agricultural traffic. So for DOT leaders like myself, we need this report, Adam. And it helps make certain that we pay attention to that agricultural movement and not just to the average motorist out there, right? Because often that's who we hear from in my position. There are several, agricultural highways running through the St. Louis region, and I'm really thrilled that this report focused in on a 600-mile corridor connecting South Dakota along I-29 and to I-70 across the state of Missouri from Kansas City on the west side through St. Louis on the east side. So that 600-mile corridor from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to St. Louis, Missouri is well digested in the report. I think it highlights, when I look at that corridor, Mary, it highlights that Missouri is an ag state. We are in the middle of the country. And as we talk about in our St. Louis Regional Freightway meetings often, we are St. Louis is the third rail hub in the United States. St. Louis Metro ranks as the third inland port. And as Mary often likes to talk about, St. Louis is the ag coast of America. So I-70 is one of the key highway corridors feeding into all three of those things about our rail hub, our inland ports, and being the ag coast of America. As noted in the report, I think it's noteworthy that the I-70 corridor throughout the state of Missouri, but definitely in St. Louis, is kept in good condition, because that's one of the things that Adam and the team looked at is what's the condition. They also noted congestion, and the congestion along the I-70 corridor throughout the state of Missouri, it's largely free-flowing traffic. Now, there is some congestion noted in Kansas City and in St. Louis, but when I look at that compared to the other corridors the report looked at, the amount of traffic congestion or delay for trucks is minimal compared to some of the other corridors that were studied. So I'm really proud of that. So I guess I'll pause there for now, Mary. I know you have extra questions.
Okay. All right. Excellent, Tom. Thanks. Okay, Adam. So in addition to the report, you obviously talked about the ag highway corridors, but you also had a section in there that included case studies. And one of the case studies included the St. Louis Regional Freightway. Can you tell our audience about that case study and what it says about our region?
Sure, Mary. So we included the St. Louis Regional Freightway case study because mainly we like the way that it thinks bigger than just within jurisdictional boundaries. What's happening right here in this region. And this region is an important hub, predominantly for grains and oilseeds trucked in from the Midwest and transferred to barges or railways, many of which are bound for export. And this region has the highest level of barge handling capacity for grain anywhere along the Mississippi River. And some of the other points that Tom noted before for its importance to ag, but the highways in and around the St. Louis region are critical to moving and exporting Midwestern grain, and the initiatives being taken by the Freightway, we think, will provide significant benefits to the agricultural freight industry, such as reducing trucking congestion, expanding regional options for exporting those commodities overseas. But more in particular, I guess the St. Louis Regional Freightway has encouraged stakeholders to prioritize freight investments using a collaborative process. And this collaborative process has resulted in significant infrastructure investment. It's attracted additional state, local, and federal investment. And what we liked in particular about the study, or the case study here, is the partnership between industry and transportation agencies to identify the most important regional freight investments and needs through interviews with local industry leaders, freight carriers, and private entities. We also like the approach taken here between public and private stakeholders to develop a criteria to narrow down that list of needed projects to the top 20 from a regional perspective. We also like the collaborative relationships and regional consensus that speaks with one voice about the importance of freight investments to the region's economic competitiveness. And this is bringing together local and regional governments, Class 1 railroads, port and barge industries, shippers, and other stakeholders in regional freight. Essentially, you're uniting what are often competing voices into a single voice. And this approach is a very effective mechanism for prioritization, programming, and grant success. And I think such activities should help the St. Louis Freightway region continue to enhance and expand its role as a freight leader.
Adam, thank you for the response. We obviously appreciated being included with that report. We also appreciated the opportunity to basically coordinate these efforts with your efforts with the report that included multiple states. So thank you on that. Ken, now we want to take this down to a more regional level. So given your familiarity with the St. Louis region and its role as the Ag Coast of America, how do you believe the latest study will further enhance our ability to grow the movement of ag products throughout the region?
That's certainly a good title to have as the Ag Coast of America, because you've seen so much investment in barge loading capabilities with new locations to put grain into a facility that would go onto a barge that would then move to really mostly an export position down in the U.S. center Gulf. And that's very important because what that's done is you've seen a great increase in their productivity capability that farmers have on their acres of land. And they're just getting more productive as they go forward here, as they adapt to technologies, better farming practices, and better technology in the seed and otherwise. They're really deploying that. And so that number one, that this type of infrastructure focus starts to bring attention to the ability to connect to other areas. We oftentimes think about the draw area for a barge loading or a grain loading facility as being about 35 miles. But in reality, when we look at the river market, it's actually more like 70 to 150 miles as you bump up against the Western railroads in particular. And that starts to see that they require more a highway capability, accessibility, and a connectivity then, not only to get onto the interstates or onto some of the state roads, but also to connect to the river loading facilities if we're speaking about grain in particular. And that's very important as we look at those, again, trying to minimize those impediments. But you're showing that, as Tom was highlighting, that the I-70 corridor, relative to others, there's not as much congestion per se, but there's also areas that we're probably going to have a lot of improvements that will be necessary. But again, there's one flip side to this: as you improve productivity of farmers, you increase export capabilities, and you also, with this infrastructure, have been able to attract barge loading capabilities. You just get more truck traffic that comes just along with that. But if I might diverge a little bit here, but you also have, as was referenced, more rail activity coming in, where you're getting rail deliveries from both sides of the river, Western railroads, Eastern railroads, bringing grain to the Mississippi River here and start to load barges in that sort of multimodal move to an export position. And quite frankly, when we looked at this in the past, we've worked with some of the railroads and shippers of looking at how can you reduce the empty miles of those rail cars that would go to the West Coast, for example. How could they come back into the Corn Belt, pick up grain, and move to St. Louis? And there's a compelling case to be made because this infrastructure just didn't show up overnight. They had to have a reason to come there. And certainly with the investment on these corridors, the recognition of them are going to be very important going forward here. But you also saw that these multinational companies wanted to make that investment, make that risk, because they saw that here from St. Louis, there's no locks between St. Louis and Asia, except for the Panama Canal, if you go that route, before you get to Asia. Or alternatively, if you're sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, there are no locks. That if you're loading downriver from Lock 27 or the Chain of Rocks lock, that it is no major impediments in your way from the standpoint of limiting the tow size. In essence, you're able to load fairly large from St. Louis down to Cairo, Illinois, and you get to the lower Mississippi. And it's a very efficient network. And we've seen a lot of improvements that have taken place on that stretch of the river over time. And that's been very important as we go through here, is that this region has a lot to offer. And it starts to expand its reach, not only for truck, but also by rail. And you think it's not only about grain, but it's also about fertilizer that's coming into the region that can move up the Mississippi River and be able to unload on either side of the river there in the St. Louis area, either to go on truck into the local area, but also be put on rail and extend its reach further into the country. So there's a lot of benefits that we see from the ag coast here of America through the St. Louis area.
Ken, great comments, and thanks for reinforcing the value of rail and multimodal, our capabilities and that geographic advantage we have on the Mississippi River. Tom, so with Adam's opening comments, he included some statistics that included 80% of domestic agricultural commodities travel on 17% of the U.S. highway mileage, And the most recent report identified the 17 corridors that are important to U.S. farmers, the ag industry, and downstream producers. I-70 through the state of Missouri and through the St. Louis region was included with this corridor. What kinds of volumes and commodities are transported on the 70 corridor?
Yeah, again, I want to thank Adam, and I think the appendixes are something I want to encourage everybody to look at too, because the report, although it's 150 pages long and has these 17 corridors, has a lot of good sound bites. I think the work that they put into the appendix on specifically the I-70 corridor is definitely worth a look. So this 600-mile corridor from from Sioux City, South Dakota to St. Louis carries over 5 billion tons of agricultural goods each year, over 5 billion ton miles, I guess, agricultural goods each year. They largely consist of corn, soybean, meat and different livestock. Specifically between St. Louis and Kansas City, corn and soybeans and meats and milk are probably the largest commodities that are identified here. And again, the appendix does an outstanding job of not only looking at the volume, but breaking that volume down each commodity almost mile by mile along that 600-mile corridor. And it's a really exciting dive. I think it reinforced to me, Mary, as we work together in the St. Louis region, that we see that divergence of traffic. If I look at the entire 600 miles in Omaha, we see traffic either getting off in Omaha for processing or getting onto possibly rail, as Ken alluded to, or maybe Interstate 80, or I guess our competitor east-west interstate corridor, which was also studied in the report.
Excellent. So I mentioned earlier in the opening comments that you are part of our Freight Development Committee, and one of our projects included with that prioritized list is Interstate 70. What infrastructure investments are being made that might further enhance the 70 corridor?
Well, this is an exciting time right now here in May of 2021. Our Highway Commission just made public our 5-year program of projects. So if you go to modot.org, you can look at all the projects that Modot is committed to deliver in the next 5 years, and you can comment on them throughout the month of May. So within that list of 5-year projects, specifically what projects are on I-70 corridor, the list of projects included in there would be like the I-70 improvements in Winsville, so on the western portion of the St. Louis region. Pretty notorious segment of interstate that often is described as a bottleneck because of the railroad overpass and the curve in the road. So that's within there. We have many projects in the St. Louis region. We have another one in East St. Charles County to improve the corridor from Cave Springs to Fairgrounds. I think it's also noteworthy if I think a little bit beyond. I know, Mary, we like to talk about St. Louis, but if I look at the I-70 corridor in totality, we've gotten a lot of great compliments. We just recently completed climbing lanes on Interstate 70 on what is a pretty known hill known as Mineola Hill in the center of our states. So we added an additional lane to allow the vehicles, especially the slower moving trucks, to have a little bit more space and comfort to get up the steep hill on Mineola Hill. And then finally, I'd have to mention, we've worked really hard in the center of the state of Missouri on I-70, and now are really happy that we have worked with federal government and local communities to fund the replacement of the I-70 bridges over the Missouri River in the Rocheport, Missouri area. So the I-70 Rocheport bridges on over the Missouri River are going to be replaced. We're in a competition right now to identify the contracting team to do that and to get that going. We're really excited about that investment.
Thanks, Tom. We appreciate all the work that you do as far as working with private industry and helping us set those priorities. And obviously, based on those improvements that you have in your program, we're very appreciative of all those efforts. Adam, let's go back to the case studies. So we understand the Freightway case study was one of 6 in the report. What were you looking for when considering the case studies that were included?
We wanted to get a variety of stakeholder input for the study from some of the national ag associations who are users of the roadways, and from state DOTs and counties who are planning and implementing agencies, as well as a regional planning perspective, such as from the St. Louis Regional Freightway. And we also wanted to use stakeholder input to visualize practices that we normally wouldn't see when we're just looking from a very high level at national freight data sets. And this gives a greater context for understanding how planning is carried out on the ground for agricultural freight infrastructure. And through our conversations with stakeholders, we wanted to identify common challenges that emerged, as well as highlight case studies of notable practices that we thought could serve as a model to help other regions. And as you noted, Mary, the St. Louis Regional Freightway case study is just one of 6 of those that we included in our report. And the St. Louis Regional Freightway case study shows the importance of engaging stakeholders and building consensus in the process of selecting, prioritizing, and implementing infrastructure investments. Whereas just looking at data or using a formula-based approach may overlook small but critical details, especially for agriculture, which may place a higher priority on, say, like a road or a bridge or an access point, typically seen through the data or a formula approach. And the St. Louis Regional Freightway serves as a great example of how increasing cooperation in freight planning and project development along the entire length of a commodity corridor or within a region can help improve performance for commodities that travel through multiple jurisdictions. For example, in our corridor studies, we identified different routes that span 45 different states.
All right, very good. So Adam, Ken's obviously talked about infrastructure at a national level and the importance. Tom has talked about it at a local level on Interstate 70. Let's kind of expand that horizon. Are other countries trying to catch up with infrastructure improvements?
Our competitors know the benefits of infrastructure investment and have been investing significant amounts in recent years. I can give you several examples. Chinese investment in Brazil, Brazil's own investments in modernizing its roadways and ports, Ukraine's own efforts to upgrade its infrastructure. This list goes on. And many of our competitors have the advantage of being able to produce commodities more cheaply than we can. And now they are also being able to move it relatively more cheaply than we can, which has narrowed that gap in recent years of our ability to deliver goods to the global markets more efficiently than our competitors. And we've seen that gap narrowing over the past several years. And the international competitiveness of our agricultural exports relies on the efficient operation of our entire supply chain, not just at our ports or our railways, but rural county roads and bridges too, as well as the national highway network. So our global competitiveness begins at home with decisions we make about investments in transportation infrastructure.
Okay, so now the pressure's on based on that response when it comes to infrastructure investment. So with that said, what outcomes or next steps are you hoping will result from the report that you were part of, and any other plans in the queue to support these efforts?
Well, we'd like this report to be the starting point for state and regional and local planners to start having conversations and using the tools we developed in the report to do their own planning and prioritizing for infrastructure while taking into account the needs of agricultural freight. And I think Tom mentioned that, looking through that appendices, there's like 150 pages, but we're planning to put more of those data sets and instructions on our website in the near future. So it should be, in addition to the report, we'll have a more step-by-step that other people can take to kind of replicate our findings. We hope that this report shows that while funding and decision-making authority usually stop at state or municipal boundaries, agricultural freight does not. So the importance of coordination across jurisdictional boundaries through efforts to encourage a regional approach for identifying bottlenecks, analyzing data, selecting mitigation efforts, this will ensure that we can maintain an efficient and competitive network for our producers to compete domestically and abroad.
Okay, Adam, thanks for your role with being part of that report, and thanks to USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and U.S. Department of Transportation, and hopefully your role with today's panel discussion and all of the work that we're doing with this report is going to allow that report to, again, meet some of the goals and objectives you guys had in mind. What other trends, positive or negative, are you seeing in the global ag industry that might impact the movement of ag products in the St. Louis region and in the nation?
Yeah, Mary, if I think about, go back to the picture of grain and think about infrastructure issues. See, grain flows like water. It's going to follow that path of least resistance. And that's very important as we think about those impediments. But we also think about the competitors that are out there that are making significant investments. And we're seeing that in Brazil, where they're investing in their BR-163 and actually getting it done. They've invested in their waterways, where they're putting in barge loading facilities and really trying to keep the dredging open and the drafts capable for barges and equipment. And you're seeing that they're trying to get better water capabilities in those regions. But you look at the U.S. infrastructure, the American Society of Civil Engineers does a great job on a regular basis to score the nation's infrastructure. And overall, we've got a C- in the United States. That's not too appealing, but it's worse than that if you look at those things that are important to agriculture and to the inland waterways and to the roads and moving to the export markets. Inland waterways have a D+. That is frightening. Only to be a little bit worse is roads that have a D. Now that's across the United States, and that's certainly a challenge that we see out there that we go across the whole network here. But when we look at what it means for agriculture, agriculture's ability to invest and to do some things has got to see a positive margin in their business. And that whole margin takes up into account even the whole supply chain. And so for agriculture, what we're seeing is in Asia, you're still seeing great amount of expansion for feeding that's taking place with the population, as well as what we're seeing with the income capabilities. Now, COVID did create some gaps in this, but it's also revealed some opportunities. We're also seeing with the African swine fever going away or at least being marginalized in China and other countries in Asia, that you're getting more feeding requirements for hogs in China. China's got more hogs on the ground than the rest of the world combined. That's a lot of feed that's required. And when we think about the need to feed those pigs, and they've moved to a more structured system of vertically integrated operations rather than having backyard operations with feeding swill. They're moving to more sophisticated operations that they've got them all on one site. Biosecurity is the operative word. They're bringing in their own grandparent stock of hogs. They want a very good feed that comes in there, and they need to have that feed on a steady flow on an ongoing basis here. So they can't have interruptions in the system out there. Because one rule we have in feeding livestock is don't run out of feed. And that's very important as we see there. But on the flip side of that, you're seeing across all of South Asia opportunities for emergence as when you feed more efficiently, you have more production for whether it's on hogs or it's in chickens or it's in for food purposes. You just get more efficient, you get lower prices, and the consumer can buy more. And that just means demand goes up all the more. It's part of that. As we look through other areas of opportunities here in agriculture, is just looking at what's going to be transforming around that technology for the seed. And certainly St. Louis has a great number of companies that are based there or have at least big operations now, and certainly doing a lot of research in that area. On the flip side of this, Mary, we're looking at some of the population trends and what we're seeing in Asia in particular, China specifically, that they're not far away from peaking out. That one child rule is catching up with them. Now they've expanded and opened up to have more children, but at some point we're seeing it going to peak out, and the ability for them to keep having a larger population may, in the next 10 to 15 years, could be that challenge on the feeding side of things. Meanwhile, the competitors around the world, whether it's in Brazil or it's in the Black Sea countries, Ukraine, Russia, and even Australia are becoming more productive. And look, the technology in the seed is transferable across geographies. They adjust for production areas and such. But I think the other side of the things, if we look at what's going on for the St. Louis to the ag coast of America, there's some great opportunities. One, you're going to have a lower Mississippi that's being dredged as we speak to 50 feet. That's going to assure reliability out into the U.S. Gulf of Mexico from Baton Rouge all the way past New Orleans, past Plaquemines Parish Port, out past Myrtle Grove into the Gulf of Mexico and to the world. Number two, that you're seeing interest in a brand new grain export elevator that is filing a permit and wants to be built in that area down there. That means they need more volume for that whole region to move through there. Several of the export elevators have made improvements at their export elevators to handle more volume, greater throughput capabilities, to load vessels faster, to get them into the market here. And we're seeing those vessels coming in because if you can load them faster, put more volume on, you just reduce that unit cost all the more to get into the world and be more competitive there. And then we're also seeing what's taking place here with the Plaquemines Parish Port that announced yesterday. They signed a letter of agreement or intent with APM, a very large terminal company that's global in nature, to be able to run what would become a very large and significant container terminal down at the Plaquemines Parish Port at River Mile 50. And that means that there'll be more containers coming in, but that also supports a container on vessel program that the American Patriot Holdings has been talking about. And they have spoken at this event several times already in the past few years here. Those are some opportunities that are coming out from down there. Meanwhile, Mary, as we know, you get the Missouri River. It's very important. Some 60% of the water that goes past the St. Louis Arch there comes off that Missouri River. But this year, we could see some concerns as we get into the late summer, fall, winter. We didn't get a great big snowpack on the Missouri River. And the Army Corps of Engineers, to manage that, to make sure there's adequate draft that will come through there, that market, that stretch of river from St. Louis down to Cairo, Illinois, onto the lower Mississippi, very important that we have adequate water on there. Also, I would suggest that the Canadian National, wanting to now be a buyer of the Kansas City Southern Railroad, could be a competitive impediment to a certain degree, as they would be connecting to move products into Mexico. There's a certain amount of grain that does go to Mexico from the U.S. Gulf. It could become more competitive to connect with the Kansas City Southern as they run parallel to the Mississippi River into Meridian, Mississippi with the Kansas City Southern and go into Mexico. We could see some competitiveness out there, which is not a bad thing. It just means we need to sharpen our pencils and make sure that this system is more competitive if we think about the third coast of for ag coast of America through St. Louis, and looking at what those developments will look like as we go forward. So a lot of positives, Mary, some headwinds in the future, and then some things we got to watch, especially on water and infrastructure, to make sure that there's a free-flowing, competitive opportunities to move down to the U.S. Center Gulf.
Ken, that's an excellent response. That was fantastic. Okay, Tom Blair. So Ken had a lot of positive things to talk about, but somewhere in there, he also talked about U.S. highway infrastructure doesn't have such a great grade, and we've got lots of challenges. USDA report obviously has identified the corridors that are helping transport a majority of the ag products. They've got the commodity flows to back it up. Give us something positive here as far as what are we doing at a state and national level as far as trying to take on these challenges? And that leads into our next question, and that is, tell us about Modot's best practice recognition that was included with the importance of highways to U.S. agricultural report.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mary, and thanks for that, Ken. That was outstanding update. It reminds me of so many things that we need to keep track of as we move decisions. But yeah, in the report, again, a great nugget is all the best practices or the notable practices that Adam and the authors that dove into. One that I'm really proud of is focused on Missouri. It's really focused on the cross-agency collaboration. In our case, in this case study that was highlighted here, it's Modot, Missouri Department of Transportation, collaborating with the Missouri Department of Agriculture. Now, it's obvious that the Missouri Department of Agriculture probably has much more frequent interactions with owners of farms, grain elevators, processing plants and stuff than Modot does. But maybe what's not obvious and is pointed out and highlighted in this case study is that Modot collaborates with the Missouri Department of Agriculture as they track that. One of the challenging things for us as a DOT, and it's highlighted in the report, is to get the ability to get that complete data of freight movement, especially that last mile. And everything. So we worked, as highlighted in the report, we work all the time with the Missouri Department of Agriculture. One thing that I would note is Missouri Department of Agriculture maintains a GIS map that shows where all the grain elevators are and the amounts of grain going through those grain elevators and everything. And we layer that map onto our GIS maps that we use to make decisions at Modot on investment in transportation. Specifically in the case study that was highlighted, we took that to a new level. We prioritized $450 million over about a 3-year period to replace 250 bridges across the state of Missouri. Now, we have over 10,000 bridges to choose from, right? So we worked with the Missouri Department of Agriculture to prioritize that $450 million on 250 bridges that not only were moving passenger traffic, but we were really focused on which of these bridges are this investment can be most critical to the food supply chain and to Missouri's economy. So we work with the Missouri Department of Agriculture to help identify which 250 bridges would be replaced. That was really good cross collaboration between our agencies that was highlighted in the reports. But we do it all the time. I mean, we have a freight enhancement annual grants program where partners like ports and stuff can come to us and apply to get additional funds. When we are the portal for those grant applications, but one of the agencies that we work with to review them to make certain that we're investing in the best projects to improve the food supply chain in Missouri economy is Missouri Department of Agriculture. That's how we rate them. And last, I'd say we are currently collaborating not only with say the St. Louis Regional Freightway, but also Missouri Department of Agriculture as we put together our state freight plan. So Modot is the leader and required to put together a state freight plan. We're doing that right now in 2021, and we're working diligently with the Missouri Department of Agriculture to make certain that we include and capture all the agricultural movements, not only on the interstates, but also on our non-interstate routes within our state freight plan.
All right, that's excellent. Tom, thanks again for all the work that you did with your collaboration for this report with public agencies, but also, as you mentioned, thanks for all the work that you're doing, especially with that freight plan that includes public and private collaboration. So thank you on that. Okay, you guys, this is the final section. We're going to start with Adam. And if you don't mind, we're just going to go around and ask if there's anything else we haven't touched on that our viewers may be interested in, or any final comments. So Adam, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Mary. And actually, Tom, you were mentioning that state freight plan, and I was thinking in our report, we took the state freight plans, the plan investment that's submitted to these state freight plans across all 50 states, and did a benefit cost analysis of that. We found that over the next 5 years, if we were to implement all those investments, it would generate benefits of $40.2 billion over the next 5 years versus $19 billion in estimated costs. So that's more than a 2-to-1 benefit cost ratio for investment in our highway infrastructure system. So I know, infrastructure is a hot buzzword these days. So we think, hopefully the tools and our report, and then in the near future, some of the interactive data sets that we're going to put on our website will help these planning entities as we go forward in our infrastructure planning. So I would encourage everyone to check out our website. Just look up the Transportation Services Division at USDA and look for that report, as well as our open data platform, which has a lot of different data sets, beyond just trucking, like rail, barge, ocean, containers. And this is a great resource for our stakeholders, and hope it helps in the near future for that type of planning investment.
Adam, great response. Thanks.
Sure. And again, sorry, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Ken, any final comments or things we forgot to ask?
Yeah, I think one thing, I know you didn't forget to ask it, Mary, because you've got a great toolbox, and you're on top of things. The whole thing around carbon sequestration, people becoming carbon neutral and reducing emissions, that is very important. And I can tell you from IHS Markit, we have formed a group here internally that is looking at that. We've got a whole practice area emerging. Much of the data that was used in that study that Adam and team put together came from IHS Markit's TransSearch group. We're working with them and transforming some of that data to look at the carbon footprint of moving to the market position. And we think about St. Louis and we think about U.S. agriculture. There's nothing more green than using the U.S. waterway system. And when you think about the amount of ton mile, or how many ton miles you get with 1 gallon of fuel, with using inland river versus rail versus truck, you're getting nearly 650 miles with inland towing versus railroads that are just under 500, and truck maybe 150. And the amount of emissions is so minuscule, really speaking about waterway usage versus truck. And now highways are still going to be very important, but the improvement of the highways, the ability to move more efficient is important, because as you have, as I think, Tom, you're talking about improving the ability for trucks to move more freely and accommodate those slower moves. As long as they're moving, we can help in some of that emissions as we go forward. And there's a lot of work going on the truck side anyways, with filtrations and different fuels and even electrification. But those are very important, that the U.S. is as green as you can be to move grain to the market, and be able to have multimodal options through St. Louis is going to be is very important, and doesn't really get the full recognition in the system. And that's something that we're going to be working on here at IHS Markit, to really dig into that and have a better perspective as we look at lane-specific analysis and then start calculating the cost around that. That's that next step up that we're going to be going through, Mary. And St. Louis is right at the spear of the tip to participate in that, and to be able to advertise that you're as green as you can be moving through St. Louis.
Ken, that's excellent. We appreciate your time today, and we are looking forward to your lane-specific analysis. Tom, Blair, any final comments, or did we forget anything?
Well, I just, again, want to thank the authors. Adam, and I know you're one of the critical authors, but thank you to all the authors. I'm going to tell you, definitely I have taken some value from this as a leader of Modot in the St. Louis region. And I already sort of cut and pasted and highlighted, and my team is going to be required to read the portions that I've highlighted so as they make decisions. I really do want to point out that, DOTs across the country need to have this information to make decisions. We have, we're required to have a program of projects, and right now we have that list of projects on our website for an open comment period. We're also required to have a state freight plan, and this can really provide value to that. Final shout out, I haven't mentioned yet, Mary, I know it's not in St. Louis, but I think it's really relevant to this topic and this audience. Just earlier this week, our Missouri Highway Commission awarded a contract to replace 31 weight-restricted poor condition bridges in the northern tier of Missouri. 31 of these 31 bridge replacements, right? We call it the Fixing Access to Rural Missouri Bridge Program, or otherwise known as FARM. That's the acronym, Fixing Access to Rural Missouri. 31 bridges being replaced at the tune of $20-some million. So that was made possible through a Federal Highway Administration Competitive Bridge Grant Program. That project to come up with those 31 bridges and to award that contract was definitely in collaboration with the Missouri Department of Agriculture, and should be a model that anyone listening to, they can go to our Modot.org website and learn more about that project. It sounds simple, but it's pretty complex and very unique. And I expect after we're done replacing those 31 rural bridges, I'm hoping that we win some national recognition for that effort.
Excellent, Tom. You did great. As usual, we appreciate your role in Missouri Department of Transportation's role with infrastructure at a state and a national level. Okay, you guys, Adam, Ken, and Tom, thanks for your time today participating in FreightWeekSTL 2021. So here's what we heard today. We heard that low transportation costs help U.S. agriculture remain competitive on the global market, and we know that other countries are catching up with us. The good news is USDA and U.S. Department of Transportation are working closely with state transportation leaders and have identified that highways are connecting to high-producing agricultural areas with ag storage and processing facilities and with inland ports and the rail industry. Using USDA's commodities and highway infrastructure that we heard today, that data, regions like the St. Louis region and the state of Missouri are leveraging infrastructure funding and making a business case for freight investment for projects like the nationally significant Interstate 70. As the U.S. population continues to grow, freight volumes are projected to increase by nearly 25% over the next 20 years. And continued investment in highways that support the movement of ag freight is more important than ever. And with the leadership of our three panelists, we have a better understanding of this market, how our industry leaders are working together to solve the not so easy challenge of maintaining the nation's highway system. So this concludes today's panel discussion. We need to do one final thank you to our sponsors. We have panel discussions scheduled throughout the week of FreightWeekSTL, along with the release of the 2022 Freightway Priority Project List that will come out on Thursday, and the Industrial Real Estate Market Report will be released on Friday. We encourage all of you to share this information from our FreightWeekSTL social media platforms, our press releases, and visit our Freightway.com website.